Have you been struggling with intrusive insomnia thoughts? Thoughts like, what if I don't sleep tonight? What's going to happen to my job? Will I be a good enough parent? What should I be doing? How can this end? Why is this happening? If so, this class is for you. We are going to see that using our framework, our universal NADA model, we can learn exactly how to meet this situation for these thoughts to fade away. And then we're going to see how it actually happens in real life. We're going to look at a beautiful comment from NLP, who has gone from insomnia and intrusive thoughts to a place of full recovery where this is no longer a struggle for her. So glad you're here. Let's get right into it. Now, firstly, I actually want to say that the model I'm going to use here is I would say an improvement from the one that I talk about in the video titled "Special Announcement: Upgrading Our Way," where I'm doing everything by hand. So if you want to kind of familiarize yourself with the model we're going to use here in more detail, I think that's still a valuable lesson. Now, what we're going to do again is we're going to have like two sections to this class. We're going to see how we leave intrusive thoughts. First, the theory. We're going to look at the theory, the model, the outline, and then we're going to look at a real life example. So let us dive right into the actual model, the theoretical framework for how this happens. I'm going to share my screen with you, and we're going to the only like prerequisite knowledge we need is to know what a token is. And when I use the word token, it simply means an object or experience that starts to represent a threat to us. We can think about dogs. We generally think of dogs as like these friendly little critters that we pet, but something might happen. We might have been bitten by a dog, and then dogs become tokenized. We start thinking of them as a threat or danger. Same thing can happen, of course, with internal experiences like not sleeping or emotions, sensations, things of that nature. But anyway, token is just something, an object or experience that starts to represent a threat to us. Now, with this in mind, we will look at how insomnia happens using our universal model. So the typical story is that there is some type of stress in our life. Something happens, we're moving, we become a parent, there's a health concern, we get an infection, something like that. And our mind goes into what I call the threatened state. This is a state where the mind is protecting us. It's on the lookout for danger. It's trying to see how it can best help us survive. And this threatened state produces thoughts, emotions, sensations, behaviors, and then there's the results of all of this. And so if we use the example of, for example, we become a parent, thoughts may be like, how am I going to be able to take care of this child? What if this happens to my child? And that may spark emotions like we become anxious. We may have sensations that come from threatened states, such as like palpitations, sweaty palms, behaviors may change in a way that we start maybe researching, talking to other parents, and all this may have certain results, Now, my point here is that all that is described is like physiological, it's practical, it's normal, it's typical, it's just what happens in life to prepare us to best be able to help ourselves and our family and everybody else. Like it's all what we want to happen. However, next up we're going to see an example of tokenization. So in this state that we just described, we become a parent, we're kind of stressed, we're in the threatened state. One thing that may happen is that we sleep less. That's a typical normal feature of the threatened state. We're more vigilant, we're more on the lookout, and it takes us longer to fall asleep. We may wake up more often, stay awake more during the night. Very typical when we're stressed, right? But then what can happen is that in this threatened state, where we find ourselves kind of like on the lookout, high alert, and we're awake at night, then I guess what can happen is that wakefulness can become tokenized. That's why I added a little T in parentheses behind wakefulness. It has become tokenized. We start thinking not sleeping, not as a maybe a nuisance or something that just happens when we're stressed, but something that is a threat, that is a danger, that shouldn't be happening, something alarming, right? Now, when wakefulness is tokenized, what happens is that when we find ourselves awake at night, then that amplifies or maintains the threatened state, because the threatened state happens when our mind thinks that there is a threat around us, right? And the threatened state produces wakefulness. And when that wakefulness then amplifies the threatened state, then we have a loop. And I think of this as the insomnia motor. This is the at the core of insomnia. What drives insomnia is this loop of wakefulness, maintaining the threatened state, keeping us in a wakeful way, etc., etc. However, the only thing we experience when we have insomnia is not this. The wakefulness is not the only thing we experience. It's not that we're simply awake a lot at night. No, we have an entire package, an experiential package that we call the insomnia package. And of course, everything in this package comes from that normal response that we call the threatened state. So we have thoughts. We have the what if thoughts. What if this happens? What if that happens? We'd have should I thoughts. Should I do this? Should I do that? We have how thoughts. How can I get over this? We have why thoughts. Why is this happening? Etc. Etc. Then we have emotions. We may be anxious, sad, angry. The list goes on. We have sensations such as we pee a lot, palpitations, burning skin. There could be a whole host of things like tinnitus, GI issues, all kinds of things. Behaviors change. We may be eating less. We may avoiding coffee. We may start wearing a sleep mask. And as you can see, this could be a huge list of things here under many of these topics. And I just put in one result here. For example, because we're eating less, we may lose weight. Now, this illustrates the insomnia package. And the point here I'm trying to make is that even though the motor, the driving force, the core of insomnia is this, then we experience this and much more, right? Now we're going to get into intrusive thoughts. Now we're going to go specifically into intrusive thoughts. And what I want to highlight next is that a common feature of the threatened state is actually what we call the token shift, where, for example, you find our teachings here, you start educating yourself, you start learning that being awake at night is actually no threat. Wakefulness starts to become detokenized. But in the threatened state, our mind is on the lookout for potential danger, and the token can shift. The object or experience that represents threats can change. It can go from one to the other. Let's say the token shift that occurred was from wakefulness to what if thoughts. We start thinking that I shouldn't have all these thoughts. These thoughts are intrusive. They're happening all the time. They're repetitive, Then what if thoughts have become tokenized. And because they're tokenized, they now maintain the threatened state. They amplify the threatened state. So now we have a new motor here, and I call this the OCD motor. And that boils down to this, that thoughts, specific thoughts, surround, in this example, in this context, it's going to be like, thoughts about sleep, what if thoughts about sleep or thoughts about sleep, they become tokenized. And then because we're thinking about sleep or insomnia, our mind goes into the threatened state and it produces more what if thoughts, and the what if thoughts maintains the threatened state. And now we have the motor now is like an OCD motor. It's thoughts that have become tokenized. But again, the only thing we experience here is not just the thoughts. We have the OCD package, I call it here, where we again have a variety of thoughts, emotions, sensations, behaviors, results. The motor is different, but the package is quite similar. And what I want to illustrate here is really that shift from one token to another. It's the same struggle. The struggle is really the same. The only thing that shifted is that the motor. Now, how do we meet this? Well, what we want to do is we want to see what the token is. What is it that has become mistaken as a threat that isn't actually a threat? What is that core misunderstanding that drives the entire struggle? And when we've identified the token, we want to befriend that token. And befriending means that we want to teach our brain that it actually isn't a threat. It actually isn't a danger. It's nothing that requires any alarm bells to go off. I want to teach our brain that the token is safe. And how do we do that? Well, I think of befriending as having 3 levels. One is the intellectual level, which is learning that being awake is not a threat or danger. It's perfectly safe to be awake at night. Having thoughts, whatever those thoughts are, whatever the content of those thoughts is, that's also not a danger. Thoughts can never, ever harm us. So that's on the intellectual level. And then we have the experiential level, befriending at the experiential level. And that's about experiencing that token without trying to avoid it, escape it, or make it go away, or control it, or manage it. So befriending wakefulness is about like finding yourself awake at night without trying to make ourselves sleep. Befriending thoughts is about having those thoughts that we don't like without trying to make them go away. Befriending is actually not active; it's actually passive. It's just about no longer trying to avoid. But that's befriending at the experiential level, and then also always at the 3rd level, befriending ourselves. Self-criticism, self-harshness is such a big driving force of the struggle. So I always want to mention self-kindness. And now we have the theoretical framework almost completed. We can see that if the intrusive thoughts were driven by wakefulness, if like wakefulness, tokenized wakefulness was like the motor, and we just had a lot of thoughts, but wakefulness was really the motor, that's really our main concern, then those thoughts, the intrusive thoughts, will fade when we befriend wakefulness, and the motor is no longer there. There is going to be no struggle. If the intrusive thoughts themselves have become tokenized, if the intrusive thoughts were driven by the tokenization of thoughts, they fade when we befriend thoughts, as we had described before. So this is really like let's call it the theoretical framework of how we can meet intrusive thoughts and how they fade away as the motor for the inner struggle is no longer there. But often what really helps us is actually like a real life example of this happens. And we have just such a real life example. That's why this is the Mind in the Comments. This is a Mind in the Comments episode. So we're of course going to look at a very, very helpful comment. And it was the comment that inspired this episode. So here it is. Martin D. Jong asked 5 days ago, great post, thanks. Could you explain, and this is actually not directed to me, this is actually directed to NL. I said NLP before in the intro, but it's actually NL212EP. The question is directed to NL212EP. How can you explain more about how you spend time while awake? Like, how did you befriend wakefulness? Also, how did you deal with intrusive thoughts during the day? Then NL212EP replies, okay, this is the honest truth, not blowing smoke. I listened to all the sleep coach school videos. That is how I passed the time while awake. They were reassuring to me. That's an example of befriending wakefulness. No longer trying to escape, but just listen to some educational material. How I dealt with the intrusive thoughts during the day was much harder. In the beginning, I fought against them. I would literally think, I'm not going to sleep tonight. And I would follow that with a contradictory thought, stop with the negative thoughts. And then I realized that my intrusive thoughts needed to be treated the same way as my insomnia. No intervention. And so I just had intrusive thoughts. I struggled with that for a long time. I thought, these thoughts are keeping me in the loop because I'm afraid of them. And then I realized that I am unable to control my intrusive thoughts, and I shouldn't try to anymore. Yes, they were scary. That is simply the nature of your thoughts when you're living in a state of fear and anxiety. So I began telling myself that you're afraid, you're uncomfortable, and you're anxious. You have stress hormones coursing through your body at high levels. Of course, you're going to have intrusive thoughts. It was like I needed to give myself permission. Those thoughts stayed alive for a long time. Then, through watching other YouTube videos about anxiety, I learned that thoughts should be allowed, but you don't have to believe them. So my internal narrative changed to, maybe I will sleep tonight, maybe I won't. Then I started reflecting on what was actually happening. did not have to quit my job. I did not call in sick. I was still coming home and making dinner and being a mom and running my household. So I began to think, okay, I don't like having insomnia. All the things I thought would happen didn't happen. So maybe, although it stinks and I hate it, it might not be impacting my life the way I'm telling myself it will or it is. That is when those thoughts began to soften. I'm happy to report that I'm fully recovered from insomnia and anxiety now. Every once in a while, I'll still have the conscious thought on purpose. I'm not going to sleep tonight. And then I wake up later on. I do this now to prove to myself that not every thought that I have is prophetic or true. I thought this was, again, such a wonderful comment, and it illustrated how the answers are always the same. It's about, like NL 212 EP said here, intellectually understanding that there's no threat. She found in other YouTube channels this truth that thoughts cannot harm us, and then experientially being willing to experience them without trying to make them go away. And as NL 212 EP illustrates, it's not like the way I teach it can sometimes come across as, oh, this should be really easy. Daniel makes it sound like it's super easy. It's going to take a while. When our brain has been frazzled, scared, upset, worried about something, it's going to take a while before it sees that there really is no threat or danger. But with that said, I think NL212 EP really illustrated with a real life example the theoretical portion of this class. I hope this made a ton of sense to you. Let me know in the comments, and we shall go from there. Bye for now. Hi, it's me, Daniel, and I hope you found a ton of value in the video that you just watched. As you can probably tell, we share everything freely on our YouTube channel about what leads us from insomnia to a place of peaceful sleep for the rest of our lives. But it can take some time and bandwidth to go through all the free content to find the answers to the questions that you have. And this is why we have already done curation for you in our Insomnia Immunity program and in BedTyme. So if you want to save some time and bandwidth, those are great options for you. In our Insomnia Immunity program, we have a video-based curriculum. In BedTyme, we have a text-based curriculum. Either way, what really matters is that the content is laid out in a logical fashion, in a stepwise fashion, where every step takes you closer to that place of peaceful sleep for the rest of your life. If this sounds like something you'd like to explore, head over to our website, thesleepcoachtool.com. And if you decide to join and let us guide you forward, we can't wait to see you on the other side.